Welcome everybody to Eclipse's book review. So today we are going to be reviewing Malice, book 1 of the Faith and the Fallen series by Jonathan Gwynne. So this book is very popular. The author is very popular, so I'm super excited to tell you guys my review. So let's just get right into it. So, intro to the book. What is it? Let's call it a dark, gritty fantasy, standard fantasy with the chosen one tropes, and darker and grittier with giants. And the giants part is really cool in this world. And it's one of those books that's going to be character focused. So you should read this if you want a standard chosen one fantasy with dark and grittier elements, with a character focus, with lots of characters, and you love the idea of giants in this world. I've kind of compared to, and comparisons aren't always fair and just, but compared to the Bound and the Broken, but grittier and more POVs. Yeah, and I mean the world being grittier and darker. Not that Bound and the Broken isn't, but that's kind of the best way I could put it. So what is this story about, if you haven't read it about? So we have a synopsis here. Young Corbin watches enviously as boys become warriors under King Brennan's rule, learning the art of war. He yearns to wield his sword and spear to protect his king's realm, but that day will come too soon. Only when he loses those he loves will he learn the true price of courage. The Banished Lands has a violent past where armies of men and giants clash, shields in battle, the earth running back with their heart's blood. So my spoiler-free review of this book is going to be 3.5 stars. Quite good, right? And 3.5 stars is not bad. Like, I know some people rave about this series, but this book has some issues for me. So let's kind of go one by one. So characters. I gave it actually 3.25 stars. I was going between 3.5 and 3 1/4. But when I was sitting back and kind of doing my notes for this book, I realized I had trouble remembering like the characters and what they did, and there was nothing remarkably memorable, right? So that's like 3 stars is average, so it's slightly above average. And it's true that there's a lot of POVs, and that kind of makes up for if it was only one of those characters, it wouldn't be that good. But many of the characters felt very samey, not very memorable. The character focus was nice. Like, I like that it was it's definitely a character-driven plot and story. And the back end of the book was far better. So, and there was some cool origin reveals. So it is Game of Thronesy in the amount of characters and POVs, but it's not on that level at all. So again, if you're okay with if you want a standard fantasy, and I do think this book is great if you don't have a lot of experience in fantasy. I've read a lot of fantasy, so it's true that this one does things a little bit differently, but and we'll get into pros a little bit. I found it quite difficult. I'm definitely a character first in terms of fantasy, for sure. Maybe not so much sci-fi, but in fantasy, I'm definitely character first. And the characters were good enough, but nothing like, I'm thinking like Darrow, Jaime Lannister, even in Bound and the Broken, many series that there's a standout, and I just don't quite have any standout characters. First Law, like, that's the bar, right? So in that case, I had to give it 3.25 stars. It's average. I think for some people it will hit harder, especially maybe if you're a newer fantasy read. I do have seen some booktubers really rave about this book, but I do see it's one of those books just like Bound and the Broken, where the first book, a lot of setup, a lot of intro, and it's only going to get better. But the problem for me really is the character arcs in this book. Like, some of the characters had some cool character arcs, but the main character was typical story, and some of the, let's say, towards the end, weren't quite like, there's some characters that made decisions that were supposed to be like subverted expectations and wasn't quite satisfying for me. But anyway, let's get into plot. 3.5 stars. So if you want something fast, this is going to be your book. This is, well, I should say the second half of this book is super fast. The first half is pretty standard political intrigue. If you like that kind of stuff, there is some political intrigue, but it's not on the level of other things that I've read, Red Rising, Game of Thrones, these kinds of books. So it's still good, especially in the world building. If you're looking something for dark and gritty and a little bit of political intrigue with prophecy and gods, giants, you can never go wrong with giants. I can't believe this is the first fantasy book that I'm really reading with like giants, except for Game of Thrones. And one of my favorite tropes in all fiction is intertwining POVs. This book has it. That was a pretty cool plot device or plot mechanic where I'm like, okay, how are all these characters going to get together in a satisfying way? And yeah, the plot did that. The author did a good job of all of these POVs converging together, and that was pretty cool. And the action scenes on here are pretty awesome. There's some cool military tactics. And there is the grittiness of the Chosen One prophecy is refreshing a little bit compared to other fantasy Chosen Ones, but everything in this plot is pretty standard in that realm. There are some twists and turns, but largely it's just above average, quite good. Action is good, but sometimes there's a little bit too much a day in the life, which didn't feel like it was necessary for some character arcs, but yeah, the nitty-gritty was good. In terms of impact, thought-provokingness, and prose, by far the weakest part of the book, I gave it 3 stars. It tickles with some of the themes, so largely it's good versus evil, light versus dark. There are some other themes that it looks to explore, like what is like greater good versus principle, standing up for your family. These kinds of themes, especially like these kinds of themes, it kind of just flirts with them. It tickles with these themes, and the pose felt very weak. Like it felt very average compared to like a Joe Abercrombie or even a Brandon Sanderson, who's not my favorite prose writer, but compared to some other fantasy authors, this was definitely average, but I did feel like it was getting better as time went on. So if you're looking for something with good prose, this is not going to be your book. It felt very standard, very average, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes you just kind of want to just read something standard and to the point. Yeah, but I had some problem with the description, especially with the characters. There was not enough variation description to really, and especially the way the characters were written from their POV, didn't give them enough distinction to where I felt like I was reading a completely different POV. Yeah, definitely the part is, but it does, again, I hate to keep using Brown and the Broken as an example, but that's how the first book felt too, to be honest with you. I definitely feel that the first book was stronger than this one, but the author seems like he's only getting better. Like the second half of the book was far better than the first half, so I'm definitely going to continue reading on, and I could definitely see it getting better, and that's also what I've heard. World building is by far the strongest part of this book. I gave it 3.75 stars. A lot of different places, the history, the way that things are left mysterious. It's not too on your nose with the world building. Not a lot of info dumps. It's kind of, he did a good job of, you're learning as you're going, but you don't feel completely lost. Banished Lands is a cool concept. The giants and the beasts inside is a cool concept, and there's a pretty awesome wolf in this story. So the world building here is very good. 3.75. And yeah. And then my last category, as always, is, well, That is always will always be fun. Like, did you have fun reading this book? That's the most important part. And for fun, I gave it 3.75. Like, the second half of this book was hard to put down because it was just super snappy, super quick paced. And that kept me quite engaged, seeing where all the different POVs were at the same time. And it was super, that when set in terms of fun and action and driving the plot forward, I had a lot of fun reading this. So 3.75 for sure. And a little bit more about thought-provokingness. Don't read this book if you want to read something that's going to completely change your mind or what it means to be human or the meaning of magic, these kinds of things. So that's my spoiler-free version of the book. I'm going to go ahead and go into spoiler version. So you've been warned, forewarned, foreshadowed. This is the time for spoilers. So read on if you like or listen on if you like. If not, this time is for spoilers. So characters. We had, let's see, Evnus, Corbin, Varadis, Siwen, Castle, Camlin, and Ventos. With Castle, Varadis, and Corbin being the three kind of major characters. Yeah, like Corbin and Varadis are really the only ones where, without like looking into the book, I can remember kind of what their paths are. But the other ones, I'm struggling a little bit. Now I'm thinking about it a little bit more. But like Castle, yeah. And by far my favorite character or my favorite POV was Varadis. I like that his character is like observing the king and, you know, being trapped into like this chosen one prophecy. Because the cool thing about this, there is kind of two chosen ones arcs and I love when books do that. I don't think it quite nails it yet, but I can see it getting really, really good. And Varadis is obviously a good dude. Like, he's doing what he thinks is right. And yeah, so his POV was really cool. And I'm interested to see where things go. And obviously with the king towards the end, that betrayal, him not being able to believe those whispers, I'm interested to see where that goes. Same thing with Corbin. Pretty standard, very, very standard, you know, good guy, chosen one, farmer boy, becoming a good fighter role. But at least his path felt satisfying. It felt earned. It took a while to get there, but there is parts of me sometimes that enjoys the nitty-grittiness of the day-to-day. Felt a little bit much here, but and some of the like bully rivalry stuff was like, seen this done a million times. So, but otherwise, I liked him. And I mean, I'm being honest with you, with the rest of the POVs, like, and the main characters, I would have to do more research about what exactly happened, and that's kind of a bad sign to me. Again, a lot of the characters felt samey, nothing too impressive enough to distinguish characters from each other, which to me can be a little bit problematic. And the big one to me was the betrayal at the end. I forget the name of the father of the young son who joins Corbin at the end there, but that one didn't feel very gratifying to me. That whole sequence at that last half was awesome, but yeah, that betrayal was like, okay, whatever. So yeah, for characters, I'm thinking of, again, First Law, Game of Thrones, Red Rising, Bound and the Broken. Not enough here to distinguish, but I do see some cool character arcs coming. I'm excited to see where the series goes because I'm sure it's going to be pretty epic. To plot, again, I gave the plot 3.5 stars. Yeah, quite good. Like, the second half of this book is very tight paced, but it doesn't lose the character focus, and it's gritty. This is dark. Like, this is a dark chosen one series, which is kind of refreshing. A couple of deaths that was like, wow, okay, I respect that. But again, the betrayal at the end didn't quite hit me. And Again, the intertwining POVs is my favorite trope. So seeing how Corbin comes across, I think, Veratus at some point, and then Veratus and Castle, and all of these intertwining things. I love that stuff. So that's why it gets the 3.5 star. That stuff is cool, action paced. Just the first half was a little bit difficult, and maybe it's the same when you read Game of Thrones the first time. I don't know, but the first half I was like, who's who? Like the prose wasn't good enough. The writing wasn't quite good enough to make me not confused for the first half. And even now, I feel like I have to read a refresher before reading book 2. So that's a little bit on the downside for me. For impact, again, and thought-provokingness, I said it before, but it kind of tickles with some of the thought-provokingness and messages. So what I mean by the greater good was like the king. Like, it feels like he's teetering between going full out evil and getting full power and doing the greater good. I like Veratus's point, though, where he killed the king. And, he kind of did that out of anger, but kind of an ends to a means situation. But don't feel like it was explored enough. Like, the consequences are explored, and we're going to see where that ends up going. But, yeah, it didn't feel like it dove deep enough into that. Same thing with the light versus evil, pretty standard. So yeah, that's why I gave it 3.5. And again, lastly, for fun, like, I had a great time reading this. Very good. Last half is action packed, again, without losing that character note and focus. That whole sequence in the woods where they get captured, and there's that one guy who got married or has his love, and he dies, and that whole last sequence, and the worm, and come on. The wolf here is by far the best part. Giants and the wolf. Like, the wolf that, like, that one had me feeling a little bit when the wolf, I forget the name, but the wolf becomes Corbin's, like, go-to man, like his buddy, his golden retriever, and pretty badass. But that whole sequence with him, and that was a lot of fun for me. So, yeah, and for world building, by far, again, the strongest part of this book is the world building. I love that it's mysterious. We keep going a little bit further into the giants, and I like that sometimes with books, or sometimes this is a problem with Sanderson's, is like the magic being so powerful that it takes me away from the world building. It's like, well, that's convenient. Never quite felt that way here. So, yeah, in that way, fun stuff, man. So again, out of 5 stars, we're going to give it 3.5. Quite good. Excited to see where the series goes, and I'm sure it's only going to get better. So, yes, thanks again, and check out the book, like and subscribe, and let me know what y'all think in the comments, man.